At this time, I'd like to just take the opportunity or have the honor of introducing our next keynote speaker. Sergeant Jody Potts. She's Han Gwich'in, and she's from the native village of Eagle. A Doyon Limited shareholder. She serves on the governor's tribal advisory council and is a board member of Native Movement. She graduated from Northern Arizona University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Applied Indigenous Studies. She also had an emphasis on environmental management. In 1998, she was crowned Miss National Congress of American Indians. She was named Doyon Youth Shareholder of the Year in 1999. Jody is also an Ironman triathlete who has competed in triathlons around the country. She has been a dog musher and a world traveler, assumably with her dog team. That's impressive. She enjoys hunting with her children. She does beadwork and skin sewing, Indian dancing, canoeing, running, and swimming. Jody believes in maintaining a balance of her traditional culture and of this modern world. So it is with great pleasure and honor that I'm able to introduce our next keynote speaker. Please welcome Sergeant Jody Potts.
Thank you for such a lovely introduction and a warm welcome up here today. Gwenjit Damunche Shalaknai, Shojre, Jiaocho, Eagle Village, Han Gwich'in, Tan Yi Shao, Shichat Mike Potts, Shanat Landrini Potts, Chitrinke, Isaiah, Kwana Denali. Good morning, all my relations. I cannot tell you how humbled and honored I feel to have been invited to give the keynote this morning. I always thought it would be such an incredible honor to have been asked to be the Sergeant at Arms at AFN, and so to have been invited to give the keynote is really quite a humbling and wonderful honor, and I want to thank AFN for this opportunity to speak today. Today I chose, instead of wearing my uniform, I chose to wear my traditional regalia that my mom made for me 24 years ago when I was 16. I'm just as surprised as you that I could still fit it. I thought it was going to be a close one. I didn't know if it happened. But it's part of who I am, my identity as a Han Gwich'in woman. And that's where I find my strength. That's how I was raised, in the way of my people and my traditional lands, and that is what has given me strength. There's so many challenges and adversity in my life, and so I want to speak to you from our traditional values, from my people, from what was instilled in me by my people. But first I want to recognize our ancestors and acknowledge them, the forward thinkers that set the stage for where we're at today, that broke the trail for us, that we're thinking about the future generations. And here we are today, those future generations. I also want to recognize our elders and youth. Our elders, we need you today more than ever. To our youth, we need you today more than ever. We need the guidance of our elders as we're facing uncertain times in our future between climate change and every day a new political crisis and another threat to our way of life. And we need our elders to guide our future generations, our young people, our youth, into how to manage these obstacles they may face in the future. And I also want to acknowledge the Tanana people for whose traditional lands we're meeting on today. You have a beautiful homeland. Just yesterday, as my children were coming into your area, to your traditional lands, they were commenting on just how beautiful and stunning your country is. So thank you for having us, all of our people, meet here today. I was really excited when I was told the theme of AFN this year. It's just such a strong theme, and I think that the theme and the things that we'll be discussing at this AFN surrounding the theme of strength and unity, leadership, partnerships, and social justice will really set the stage of advancing our people and having us grounded and rooted in our traditional ways. AFN also asked if we tell a little bit of our story. And I know as Native people, it's hard for us and it's hard for me, for sure, to talk about myself. But really, I want to talk about where I came from. I was raised on the land of my people. And I was raised in a traditional way of life. This is my land. This is the land surrounding Eagle Village. And I'm hoping I can work the clicker here today. There we go. I was really blessed to be raised in such a traditional way of life. My father actually comes to Alaska from Iowa, and he was a young kid and really wanted to live in Alaska and was very interested in Native American people and our way of life and living off the land. And the day after high school, when he was 17, he moved to Alaska by himself, and eventually, within a few years, made his way to my mother's village, Eagle, and he just fell in love with the country and the people, and my grandfather took him in and showed him our way of life, and he became a trapper. Some of my first memories as a child are actually of sitting under the table in my grandpa's house. This is before we had electricity. I was raised without a lot of modern conveniences. And my grandpa was a fiddler. He traded furs to the Hudson Bay and got a fiddle when he was a really young man and taught himself how to play the fiddle. And so growing up, I heard my grandpa play on a regular basis, and I would see my aunties and uncles and my parents dancing, and those are some of my first memories, and they're just really warm and wonderful memories. Some of the other things that I remember growing up was hearing, because we didn't have television or anything else, we told a lot of stories, and my grandpa was a storyteller, Unity. And he's told stories about when he was a young man, remembering the warriors of our people, the young men going out for days with just maybe a little dry meat in their pockets, going out for days in winter, and no matter the temperatures, on snowshoes. And when they would chase what is now known as the 40-mile caribou herd, and they would herd those caribou around and back to our caribou fences that our people built. And they would bring, all the people would be there waiting, and that's how they would get enough meat to last them through the winter. And so, those are the kind of stories that really instilled a sense of strength of who I am as a Han Gwich'in person. And I thought oftentimes throughout my life, as I face challenges, adversity, as I'm running an Ironman and my body's hurting and I still have 20 more miles to go, I think about our people and who we are. And I know that goes for all of us here in this room. We come from such a strong people. Our ancestors really set the stage. And the blood of those warriors that chased caribou for days on end, trying to feed their people, if they gave up, it would be doomed for their people. And that's the same blood that runs through me. And that's the same blood that runs through all of you. We come from a very strong people. And just look around. Look around today in this room. I stand here just in awe of the beauty, wisdom, and collective strength that we hold together, unified here today. When I was growing up, my dad, if I was playing a sport or something, he would take me out running with him. And I think that's something that really help me in my future. He would go out and run 3 or 4 miles, and then in the last quarter mile, he would really run fast, and it would be, winter, 20, 30 below even. He cut it off at 30 and said we didn't have to run if it was colder than 30 below. And, I would try to follow in his footsteps, and I'd try to keep his pace, and he would tell me, Jody, go hard, finish strong, and he would holler back at me, and I would do everything I had from a young age to go hard and finish strong and follow my dad's footsteps. And I just want to thank my dad for leading our family, raising us on the land in such a beautiful traditional way of life, close to our people, the Han Gwich'in, and for your example of strength, hard work, and perseverance. I want to tell you a little bit about my mom. She was like, oh no. To me, my mom was a fearless, courageous leader. Growing up, I'll tell you a couple of stories. I have a really vivid memory of being a little girl, and I was accused by another friend in town. Eagle has a village and then a community, a city government, where another group of people live. And one of my friends in town had accused me of saying something really, really mean and nasty. And I told my mom, I said, no, I would never say that. My mother believed me. And we walked down to town 3 miles, and my mom confronted the accusing mother. And I got a little nervous, it was getting a little heated. But my mom did that. She believed in me. She knew my integrity, and she knew I wouldn't do something like that. And ultimately, the little girl admitted that she lied, and they apologized. And as we were walking back to our village, it was just quiet for a while, and my mom held my hand, and we were walking, and she stopped, and she looked down at me and said, Jody, let this be a lesson. Don't take Trent from no one. For those of you who don't speak Han Gwich'in, I'll translate. She said, Jody, don't take Anak from no one. Thank you, Mom. Several years ago, it was mentioned in the introduction, I was mushing dogs and I was training for races, and once in a while I train at night. And I came in late at night from running dogs. Sometimes my kids would jump in the basket of my sled, and we talked for about 5-10 minutes before the sled would rock them to sleep in their sleeping bag and winter gear. But I came in late one night, and my mom was actually at my house, and she was sitting at the table sewing and drinking tea. And I was really excited about how my dogs did, and I was thinking during that run, I thought, man, my parents traveled all these, we traveled by dog team out to our trap line. I was raised in a dirt floor trap line cabin. I was raised in, you could see in these pictures, really humble beginnings. And I was reminiscing about that night while I was out running dogs. And I came in and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, I was just thinking about you so much, of how many miles you must have mushed those dogs over the years. Our trapline cabin was 70 miles from our village, over mountains, uphill both ways. And she said, oh no, I never mushed those dogs. I was always out ahead of the team breaking trail on snowshoes. And that goes for a lot of the women of our people. And that's the woman who raised me. And that's how I'm up here today. And she definitely modeled for me an example of advocating for myself, for our people through her leadership with the Tribal Council in Eagle as I was growing up, as her work as a health aide. She was really courageous. She also, during the 80s, we had a lot of tragedies in our village. You can see in these pictures, though, we were out on the land a lot. Picture of us in one of our temporary camps between trap line and probably another camp. But in the 80s, we had a lot of tragedy in my village. There were 4 bootleggers in our community. And from the bootlegging resulted in a lot of accidents that resulted in death. My uncle committed suicide after he bought alcohol from a bootlegger, and a lot of other tragedy. Excuse me. My mom was a health aide at the time, so a lot of times she was responding to these. She was also on the tribal council, and she had enough. And I know today we're experiencing this still. 20-some years later, we're still having the same experience where we are experiencing bootleggers and drug dealers coming into our country, into our villages, and there's not enough response to these issues. And we have tribes, we have tribal leaders from Sandpoint to Allakaket to Northway to villages in the Bethel region. And these tribal leaders are standing up to these bootleggers. And I distinctly remember when I was a little girl and all these things were happening, and there's so much grief in our villages, in our village. And my mom worked with the Alaska State Troopers back before it was a thing. And she took down 4 bootleggers. She worked and did a controlled buy and had a lot of courage. And she knew there were going to be threats. She knew there was going to be some outcomes that wasn't favorable for our family. And she still stood her ground. And she did the right thing. And those bootleggers were taken away. And things improved in our village. And so, Mom, thank you for your courage. And thank you for my people. I have my people here from Eagle, my family, for instilling traditional values so strongly, for raising me on the land, on my traditional lands. And that is what has guided me and what has given me strength throughout my life. As a child, I was also very observant and a very curious child, and I was always watching and listening to our leaders. And I remember how exciting it was knowing that our traditional Chief Andrew Isaac was one of my relatives through my grandfather, who I spoke about earlier. Chief Andrew Isaac grew up in the 40-mile country. I'm from Eagle. His family was from Mansfield, Upper Tanana area. And back when he was a little boy, the turn of the 20th century, his people from the Tanacross Mansfield area would go meet at a place called Ketchumstock. And Ketchumstock, in the fall time, a certain time of year, is where what is now known as the 40-mile caribou herd would all end up congregating and traveling and migrating through this area called Ketchumstock. And my grandfather and our band of Indians and the other bands would all gather there. And Chief Andrew Isaac grew up playing with my grandfather. And so because of that connection, but also because I always had such a respect for our leaders, I grew up watching him and listening to him. And I remember hearing him talk about the future generations, about protecting our land. When he was a young man, my kid's age, a young teenager, he experienced, just like my grandfather, a lot of epidemics that came through and that would kill dozens and dozens of our people. And a lot of us, I'm sure, have experienced grief, but probably not to that magnitude. And he, through all of that, he still maintained faith. One of the things I think is so amazing is he spoke about all of those things happen for a reason, and everyone is alive for a purpose. He believed in following our traditional Athabascan ways, in making decisions, working hard and respecting the land and our resources. And that's how my parents raised me. That's how my people raised me as well, is with that deep connection to the land, by being raised on the land, by following our way of life, and eating our traditional foods. There's that deep connection. And that's what traditional Chief Andrew Isaac spoke about. I think about, I saw a sign this summer, and it really spoke to me. I was actually driving through the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. My children are Navajo and Lakota, Oglala Lakota, and we were driving through Oglala Lakota Reservation, and I saw this sign, and it really spoke to me. So I pulled over really quick, and I ran back and I got this picture. And I knew I wanted to share it because, you know, our people have gone through so much over the last contact. And a lot of the things that we are experiencing today, we struggle with, are a result of colonization. And our ancestors were forward thinkers, and they prepared a way for us to rise up. And we as a people today, we have this younger generation, and I think of the generation that is standing up. I always think about the young people from Tanana who spoke on stage a couple years ago and talked about the abuse that they've experienced and endured. And they were very courageous, and they stood up. And I think we all have to remember to raise our kids as young warriors, to raise them with that purpose, that sense of belonging. We have to remind them and raise them in our traditional values so they'll be rooted and grounded in them. And that is what has given me strength, is being rooted and grounded in my traditional values. When I think about the theme strength and unity, I think about everything that our people have gone through. We now, of course, have historical trauma, and we have what people call the social ills that we're experiencing. And, I really think about everything that our people have gone through since contact. But here we are still today. And there's strength in this room, there's strength in our villages. We have a lot of collective wisdom from our traditional values. And I want to share a personal story of positive things that can come out of something very difficult. In March, my children lost their father to suicide. And in the first several months, it was very difficult, as you can imagine. I know Alaska has high rates of suicide, and maybe some people in here can relate. The complicated grief that we go through, the challenges of getting through the fog of that grief. So I took a couple months off. I wasn't really getting better, and my kids needed my support, and they needed me to focus. So with the support of leaders at Tanana Chiefs, I took 2 months off to focus on my kids. I took them to see their family on the Navajo Nation and the Oglala Lakota Nation. We really needed to be by family. I wanted them to find strength in the other part of their culture. They were so raised in our culture. But through that, we were able to, again, enjoy life, enjoy family, and see that there's a future. And really, when I think about it, when we're in our darkest days and our darkest moments in the last 7 months, the greatest strength that we found was when we came together, me and my 3 children. We found strength and unity. And I see that among our people, everything we've gone through, we really have strength and unity. We have a joint story that needs to be told. And these stories help give us strength. Our resilience and our stories and our way of life really unite us. We may come from different cultures and different tribes, but really these are the things that unite us. Most commonly, our way of life. Leadership. All of you here are leaders, and I respect and honor every one of you. As I was preparing for this speech, I reached out to a lot of our leaders in my region, former chiefs, current chiefs, and I heard a very common theme. As I talked to them for guidance and wisdom, everyone talked about our way of life and our traditional values, and also preparing for the future. They talked about preparing our youth for the future. And when I talked to Trimble Gilbert, when we started our conversation, we were talking about hunting. And we asked each other, did you get any meat this year? And Trimble and I were speaking, and I told him, well, I just got a caribou, and I'm really happy, and it was just such a, my kids and I, we had a really hard time in the last 6 months, and we were gone all summer, so I didn't get any fish or berries, and my freezer was literally empty, and that by late August, we usually have a little more to prepare us for the winter, and as we all know how much our traditional foods mean to us, and just like Trimble said, our traditional foods give us strength. That is our strength. And I just thank him and honor him for his wisdom in that. And I was telling him, and I tell this story reluctantly, I almost don't want to tell this story, because in our way, we shouldn't brag about our hunting, we shouldn't boast, but I tell you this story with a humble heart and with a purpose. All these years I've been hunting. I moved back from after graduating college with my kids. They were really little. I think Denali was 4, he's now 12, almost 13. And I've always taken my kids hunting with me, just me and them. You know, didn't have a partner or a husband to do this, and we needed to eat, and my parents raised me this way, so I always had my kids out hunting with me. Slide, please. Just some fun pictures of having my kids out in the land and trying to build that connection with them. My son getting his first caribou last year. But this year, I went out and I was by myself. My kids have really wanted to honor their father, who was an outstanding athlete and was a wonderful student and was on the Honor Society, so they're really focused on school. And this year they said they didn't want to go out hunting with me. And I have to be honest, I was really nervous. I was wondering, how am I going to do this alone? My kids are so much help. They helped me pack out meat. But I went up and I drove up to Eagle Summit. It was the only place open. It was only open for 2 days. Fish and Game, we need to talk about this. It's only open. I couldn't go out hunting because I had a lot of meetings, but the second day my calendar was clear. So early in the morning I texted my boss. I said, "Boss, I need to go get some meat for my kids. I need to take a personal day," and she's awesome, really supportive. And so I dropped my kids off at school and I took off 2 hours north of the Steese Highway to where the caribou, the 40-mile caribou herd were said to be, and that's the herd that I hunted growing up and my people have lived off of for millennia. And on the way up, I was really scared. I've never hunted alone. I didn't know if I could do it. And one of the things that I learned through this tragedy my kids and I experienced is I became more prayerful, because I knew we couldn't get through this alone. And on the way up, I was really scared, so I started really praying. And I prayed for meat. I prayed for this traditional food that would give my kids and I strength. And I got up there and there were hunters everywhere, a lot of people from the fort. I didn't see any other native people around, and it was really foggy. And the summit was very covered in fog, and about halfway down Eagle Summit is where the fog ended and it was clear. And so there were just hundreds of trucks and hundreds of hunters out there, and sometimes they shoot around at each other and it's not very safe. And so I decided with this prayerful attitude, something told me to go up into the fog. And so I went up into the fog, and you couldn't see from here to the back of the room. And I saw a wildlife trooper, and I work a lot at the trooper post, and I know a lot of these guys, and he was stopped. And so I pulled up and I rolled down my window just to say hi, see if it was one of my buddies. And he said, "Oh, hey, the only reason I stopped was like 20 seconds ago. Remember, I couldn't see very far ahead of me." He said, "A herd of 100 caribou just crossed the road. I don't see them now." And so I pulled over real quick and I squinted and I looked into the fog, and sure enough I could see a really faint outline of a herd of caribou. And so I parked, I jumped out, and I ran into the fog, and the trooper drove off. And I ran into the fog and I got close enough where I could see a bunch of caribou, a bunch of cows, and one bull, and he was kind of going back and forth. And I kept running, and pretty soon he stopped and he turned broadside, and we just looked at each other, and I just got down and I took my shot, and we were blessed with meat. And I've never cried, I never felt so blessed in my life, because I knew that my kids needed that, and I needed that. And that connection that I talked about with how my parents raised me on my land, how my people taught me, was that connection with our land, with our animals, and that caribou gave itself to me and my children. And I honor this caribou in the picture, and I've been reluctant to even share this, my selfie with my caribou. But I just really want to remind everyone about that connection, and I think that's really important as we look into the future with uncertain times. You know, I come from a matrilineal society. We have strong women in the Athabascan culture, and I know we have strong women throughout this state with our indigenous people. When I think about the leaders that I have watched growing up, I've seen vision from our chiefs and our leaders, conviction and determination. And I really think that if all of us collectively were united and we're strong, and our leaders guide us and lead us, rooted in traditional values with courage, vision, and it's not always going to be a very comfortable place. You know, when we stand for our way of life, it's not going to be comfortable. When we stand up for what's right, it'll be uncomfortable. But that's where we need courage. You know, and I look around this room and I see that. We've had courage, and that's how we're here today. You know, our leaders, the people who founded AFN, who settled our land claims, had courage. When the federal government wanted us to take less land, they said no. We want our traditional lands. We want to continue our way of life for our people. We want to protect our lands. You know, and we need our leaders to think about the future, just like the people 100 years ago were thinking about us today. Like Chief Andrew Isaac spoke about, like all my leaders directed me as I was asking for assistance, is to think about our future. And when we make decisions, leaders, whether in the boardrooms, in our tribal councils, in our personal lives, they need to be guided by our traditional values of respecting the land, of respecting ourselves and our people, and especially our way of life. Our children, our grandchildren's grandchildren need that. And we need to put our minds together and think about the life we can create for our children, like Chief Sitting Bull said. Like Chief Andrew Isaac always talked about future generations. We need the courage to stand up for what our values tell us. And they tell us to protect the land. We need the courage from our leaders to say, no, we're not gonna develop in the Arctic Refuge, at the birthing grounds of the caribou. We're gonna protect the Arctic Refuge. We're gonna protect Bristol Bay and the watershed of the salmon. That's who we are. We are protectors. We're defenders of our people, our way of life, and our land. When I think of partnerships, especially today, you know, we really need to work on our partnerships, and sometimes that means our partnerships among our own. You know, it's really disheartening when sometimes money comes between our people and our way of life and our values. And I really want to encourage our leaders to partner with our tribes. Our tribes are federally recognized. They are considered sovereign governments. There is so much strength in that. Now, they don't have a land base. How can we strengthen our tribes? How can we partner with our tribes? They're going to be the ones that lead us into the future. The tribes are grounded and rooted in our traditional values like no other. I've seen it. Social justice. I think about what my mom taught me. She was really a social justice warrior. She taught me to advocate for myself. She stood up for what was right. A lot of women in my community did. You know, everything that the negative statistics about Alaska being highest crime rates in the country, most dangerous state in the country, and then you look at internally within Alaska, you think of the crime rates. We hear about the crime in Anchorage, and it's very significant. But if you look at the crime per capita for our villages, it's even higher. It's much higher, in fact. And these are impacts of colonialism, suicide, sexual assault. All of these things are impacts of colonialism and historical trauma. I encourage all of us to rise up and stand with our victims of violence. Stand up with me. We need to stand in solidarity in support of our victims. There's not enough of that in our villages, unfortunately. As a victim of violence and a survivor myself, I say we need more people to support our victims. I said that last year and I'll say it again and I continue. You know, I found my calling in life in public service, and I think that came from the way my parents raised me. And I'm not in uniform today, but I am really honored and fortunate to serve our people in the capacity that I do as a village public safety officer, but also as the director of public safety for Tanana Chiefs Conference. And to be forward thinking, to think how can we improve this disparity of public safety in rural Alaska? There's no denying that there's a disparity. Urban Alaska gets a priority. Rural Alaska, they have a substandard level of service for our villages in both education and public safety. And while in my career in the last years as a VPSO, I've seen a number of outstanding troopers, VPSOs, and I've been fortunate to work with the Anchorage Police Department, also Fairbanks PD. I've seen a lot of really compassionate public servants, you know, that really want to help victims and do the right thing, and I'm really lucky to work with a number of outstanding officers. But we really need to address the legislature on how rural Alaska is treated. When I hear legislators making comments about our women that are very disparaging, when I hear legislators that want to cut the VPSO program when it's so vital to the safety of our children and our women and our people in our villages, we need to rise up and take a stand against that. I know that everyone here is very politically involved. That's why you're here. But the people back home in our villages, we need to get them engaged and involved. We need them to vote. We need to vote our values, people. You know, I have a vision, and I've been working with government agencies for a while. And my vision is to see our people rise up. And there are people doing this work. You know, I think of the courageous warriors who are working on climate change issues, that are trying to get our government to transition into a different economy. We're now broke in this state. You know, there's a lot of work to be done, especially for this challenging future. But there's a new group out that's called Native People's Action. Check out their website, nativepeoplesaction.org. It is a group that is trying to engage our people, and they are rooted and grounded in our traditional values, being guided by that. And that's what's going to take us into the future. And I can't help but imagine in my vision, is imagining an Alaska once again, and I say once again, guided by our traditional values, defending our way of life and our land. All my relations, all my people, together we have to rise up. We need to find our strength and unity. We need our courageous leaders. We need strong partnerships with our people, among our people, with our tribes, with our governments. We need to have a healthy, hearty handshake out, ready to receive others. But we have to rise up. And together, I think we can make Alaska great again.